Her father would die if she failed to figure out how to pacify her spirit husband. Once upon a time, in a village far south, lived a young woman named Liana. Liana was the only daughter of a very notable king. She was her father's favorite daughter, who had never stepped her foot outside of her father's palace all her life. Liana had been prohibited from leaving the palace, as her father warned her sternly never to leave to avoid a great calamity from befalling her. The young woman never understood why she was confined to the four walls of the palace, as her father only told her that their tradition forbids her from leaving the palace. He also made it clear that if Liana ever left the palace, she would bear the consequences of her actions. She would bear the consequences of her actions. All her life, Liana wondered how her village looked, as all she had grown up to see were the palace grounds. The palace itself was an architectural marvel, adorned with intricate carvings of ancient deities and vibrant murals depicting the history of their ancestors. One day, Liana overheard some palace maidens talking about the upcoming village festival, which was a few days away. She wondered what it would feel like to be present at the festival, and the thought of this beclouded her thinking. Liana then decided to go against her father's wishes by attending the festival in a bid to satisfy her curiosity. Liana dressed like a palace maiden to disguise herself as she snuck out of the palace grounds unnoticed. She trailed the other maidens, who were all heading to the festival ground, as her heart raced in excitement. They arrived at the festival ground, and Liana was confronted by a multitude of people who were merrying and dancing under a canopy of brightly colored flags. The air was filled with the aroma of roasted yams and spiced meats from the food stalls that lined the festival square. This filled her with so much joy as she joined in the jubilation. Liana was finally happy to be free, as all her life she had never witnessed freedom of this magnitude. She danced to her heart's content and bumped into a very handsome man who smiled and asked if she was new to the village, as he had never seen her before. Liana smiled and was about to reply to the handsome man, when suddenly the man held his throat as though he was about to choke. The young man then fell to the ground, and when the villagers ran to check on him, they confirmed that he was dead. Liana, on seeing what had happened, rushed back to the palace before anyone would notice that she was away. By morning, the news of the young man's mysterious death spread around the village, reaching the ears of the king, who wondered what could have killed the vibrant young man. Word then began to circulate that the young man died at the hands of a witch who dressed like a palace maiden. They had seen him talking to a strange girl when he collapsed, and everyone pointed to the palace for answers. The king and his cabinet all wondered who this palace maiden was, and called an emergency meeting of the maidens in the palace to ascertain who the culprit was. After hours of interrogation, none of the maidens owned up to what had happened, and the king, in anger, proclaimed that all the maidens be sent into the forest of the ancestors. This was a way to ascertain who the liar was. In their village, when a person commits a heinous crime and they deny ever committing such a crime, they are sent into the forest of the ancestors. If, after a few days, they return alive, then it will be evident that they were telling the truth all along. But if they never return, then it will be clear to everyone in the village that they were lying. The forest of the ancestors was an eerie, ancient woodland filled with towering trees and whispers of unseen spirits. Liana overheard her father's decision to send the palace maidens into the forest of the ancestors. She was too scared to own up to what she did, so she kept quiet and did nothing. The maidens were then sent into the forest of the ancestors, and after a few days they all returned unharmed. Liana, unsure of what would happen to her if her father realized that she was the maiden he was looking for, locked herself up in her room and never came out. A few days passed, and a palace maiden came in to inform Liana that her father had requested her presence. Liana's heart raced as she walked gently to her father's throne room. When she arrived in her father's presence, she met her father, the king, who asked how she was doing following all the recent happenings in their kingdom. Her father then went on to reveal that her freedom was so close. He told her that the time had come for her to choose her groom, as only then would she be free to leave the palace. Liana was extremely happy to hear this. Her father then went on to inform her that within the coming days she would be presented with a choice of eligible bachelors who would all be interested in being her groom. She would then have to choose amongst the men the one that she would spend the rest of her life with. Liana was overjoyed to hear this from her father. She returned to her room happy as she fantasized about what her life would be like, free and able to leave the palace without any restrictions. As the days went by, all the eligible bachelors of the village came forward to declare their interest in marrying Liana. They all could not wait to finally see what she looked like, as she had been an illusion to them all their lives. The day of the unveiling arrived, and Liana was dressed in a very beautiful dress. The dress was adorned with golden embroidery and delicate beads that glistened in the sunlight, making her appear almost ethereal. She looked so beautiful and could not wait to see the men that wanted her for a wife. She waited in her chamber patiently till her father called out for her at the banqueting hall. Liana walked gracefully into the hall, and when the young men set their eyes on her, they all fell to the ground and fell into a very deep sleep. All efforts to wake them up proved abortive, so their families came in and carried them away. Everyone, including the king, froze as they watched the young men being taken away. This was the beginning of Liana's nightmare. She ran as fast as she could away from the banqueting hall, screaming in terror. Liana could not understand what was happening, so she locked herself up in her room as she shook in fear. Her father, the king, in a bid to understand what had just happened, consulted with the chief priest of the village, who informed him that Liana was behind what had happened. The gods then revealed that Liana went against the age-long covenant that had been standing between the royal household and the village ancestors. The covenant stated that no first child of the king should ever step their foot out of the palace until after their marriage ceremony. Because Liana broke this rule, she brought the wrath of the spirits upon herself. The chief priest went on to tell the king that Liana had already been bound in marriage to the spirit of the young man whose death she caused at the festival, and that the young man's spirit was behind what happened to the men who came to marry her in the palace. The king screamed in pain as he could not believe the calamity his beloved daughter had brought upon herself. He asked his chief priest what could be done to salvage the situation, and the chief priest revealed that Liana holds the answer to her freedom. Liana cried profusely in her room, saying, "If only I waited a few more days, I would have been free without bringing all this calamity upon myself." Liana was filled with regret as she wondered what would become of her now. After a few minutes, a maiden came in to inform her that her father had requested her presence. Liana, filled with fear, walked gently to her father's throne room. She feared what her father would do to her, as she knew that by now her father would have consulted his chief priest about the whole issue. "You left the palace grounds against my instruction," the king said, with disappointment written all over his face. "I am sorry, father. I heard of the village festival and wanted to experience it for myself," Liana said, as she began to weep profusely. Her father, still disappointed, informed her that she was now married to the spirit of the young man whose death she caused at the festival, and that the young man was the one behind what happened today at the palace. Liana could not believe her ears. "How is this possible, father?" she asked, with confusion written all over her face. Her father explained to her that, according to the age-long covenant, anyone that breaks the covenant and steps his or her foot out of the palace would be cursed, and that anyone who takes an interest in them will die. They will then be bound in marriage with the person's spirit. Liana was puzzled and asked her father what she could do. Her father then revealed to her that she held the answer to her freedom. Liana returned to her room, confused. She stared blankly into the distance, lost in her own thoughts. She could not believe all that her father had said and decided to sleep, hoping that she would wake up from this terrible nightmare. Liana drifted into a very deep sleep. In her dream, she met the man from the festival in the forest as he smiled and walked towards her. The forest was eerily quiet, with a mist that gave the surroundings an otherworldly glow. Lana found herself so agitated in the dream as she rebuked the man, asking him to leave her alone, as he had ruined her entire life. This infuriated the young man, who stormed out on her angrily, causing Liana to wake up from her dream. Liana woke up so angry and made up her mind to deal with the man if he ever appeared to her in her dreams again. That same night, the young man appeared to Liana once again, and this time Liana slapped him so hard, warning him never to appear to her in her dream. For weeks, Liana had a peaceful sleep as she never saw the man again. This was such a relief to her. One morning, Liana was still asleep in her room when a maiden rushed in to inform her that her father was dying. Liana ran as fast as she could, and when she arrived at her father's chamber, she met the chief priest, who told her that her father would die if she failed to figure out how to pacify her spirit husband. Lala was shocked to hear this and pleaded with the chief priest to help her, as she did not want her father to die. The chief priest then told her to go make peace with her spirit husband, because if she failed to do so, her dear father, the king, would die. Liana returned to her room, panicking as she began to plead with the spirit not to kill her father. She spent hours pleading with the spirit to show himself in her dream, but every time she went to bed, the spirit never appeared. For several days, Liana pleaded with the spirit, but still, it never graced her with its presence. The king's condition was worsening, and Liana could not stand to see her father suffer any longer. She decided to end it all, believing that doing so would put an end to the calamity that had befallen her dear family. Liana sat on the floor as she asked the spirit one more time for forgiveness, saying that she had been left with no other option than to end it all, since the spirit had decided not to forgive her. The room was dimly lit by a single candle, casting flickering shadows on the walls as she wept. Immediately, Liana fell into a very deep sleep and saw the young man's spirit in the forest. The spirit told her never to kill herself, saying, "He who is dead wishes to be alive, and you should never take that which you cannot give." This brought Liana to tears as she apologized to the spirit from her heart, asking him to forgive her for what she did unknowingly. Liana also pleaded with the spirit to release her from the bond of marriage and spare the life of her dear father, as well as the young men who were still sleeping in their various homes. The spirit, sensing that Liana was genuinely sorry, forgave her and granted all her wishes. Liana was so grateful to the spirit as she thanked him for his forgiveness. She woke up so happy and rushed off to her father's chamber to notify him of what had just happened. To her greatest surprise, when Liana approached her father's chamber, she noticed that her father was no longer sick. Joy filled her heart as the dark days were finally over. That was how Liana regained her freedom and was no longer tied in marriage with the spirit. She lived the remainder of her life happily as she finally got married to a prince from a faraway village. The story of Liana teaches us a profound lesson about the importance of patience and the consequences of our actions. It reminds us that hasty decisions driven by curiosity or impatience can lead to unintended and sometimes dire consequences. Patience is a virtue that can help us avoid great disasters and make thoughtful choices that positively impact our lives. As the saying goes, one moment of patience may prevent a great disaster, while one moment of impatience may ruin a life forever. Thank you for watching my channel. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more interesting and captivating videos. See you in the next story. Bye. Mr. Richard Coleman was a man who appeared to have everything in this world: a booming business empire, a luxurious lifestyle, and respect from his peers. At 45 years old, he stood as one of the wealthiest men in the country, managing an empire so vast that his name was synonymous with success. Yet, behind his charming smile and tailored suits, Richard's life was hollow. He was often alone, surrounded by riches yet starved of genuine companionship. His personal life was an endless cycle of fleeting relationships, with no one to come home to after a long day at work. He would often ask himself, in the privacy of his thoughts, is this all there is to life? Richard was a complex man, a brilliant leader, but flawed in his personal dealings. He had three close friends: Michael, his longtime personal doctor, who often doubled as his confidant; Thomas, his loyal driver of over a decade; and Samuel, his co-worker and someone he trusted with difficult decisions at the company. The four had an unbreakable bond between them, frequently gathering at their favorite hotel in the heart of the city to enjoy lively banter and unwind from life's stresses. It was a Friday evening, and the four friends sat at their usual table in the grand dining hall of the hotel. The atmosphere was relaxed, filled with the murmur of conversations and the soft clinking of cutlery. Chandeliers overhead cast a warm glow, reflecting off the polished wooden tables and the sparkling crystal glasses. Richard sipped his wine, his eyes scanning the room lazily. Michael, ever observant, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Richard, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room," Michael said, setting down his glass of whiskey. "What elephant?" Richard replied, raising an eyebrow. Thomas chuckled. "Come on, boss. You're 45 years old and you're still living like a bachelor. You switch women like you change cars." Richard grinned but said nothing. Samuel joined in, nudging Richard playfully. We all know you're a master businessman, Richard, but what's the point of having all this money if you've got no one to share it with? Have you thought about settling down? Richard rolled his eyes. Oh, not this again. Why does everyone keep pushing this marriage agenda on me? Because, Thomas said, leaning forward, you're not getting any younger. Look at yourself, boss. You've built an empire, and yet here you are, dining with us instead of sharing this table with a wife. I don't need anyone, Richard replied, waving them off. I'm perfectly fine on my own. Besides, how do you even know if someone really loves you? Most women just see me as a walking bank account. Michael sighed, his tone softening. Maybe not all women are like that, Richard. You just have to look for the right one. Though Richard brushed off his friend's comments, their words lingered in his mind as he drove home that night. His penthouse apartment was as grand as they came, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. The decor was sleek and modern, with plush furniture and abstract artwork adorning the walls. But as he stepped inside, the silence was deafening. He poured himself a drink from the well-stocked bar in the corner and stood by the window, staring out at the glittering city lights. Maybe they're right, he thought, sipping his whiskey. Maybe it's time I find someone. The next few weeks passed uneventfully, but the idea of settling down began to take root in Richard's mind. He decided to make an effort, attending a few social events and mingling more than usual. That's when he met Olivia. Olivia was nothing like the women Richard usually dated. She was graceful, intelligent, and had a warmth that drew people to her. They met at a charity gala where Olivia was volunteering to help raise funds for underprivileged children. The grand ballroom was adorned with elegant decorations, and the hum of conversation filled the air as attendees mingled, sipping champagne. "Good evening," Richard said, approaching her with his signature charm. Olivia looked up and smiled politely. "Good evening. I'm Richard Coleman." He introduced himself, extending a hand. "I know," Olivia said, shaking his hand. "You're hard to miss at an event like this. I'm Olivia, just Olivia," he asked playfully, raising an eyebrow. Olivia laughed softly. Olivia laughed softly. "Olivia Bennet, but no fancy titles like you." Richard chuckled, impressed by her confidence. "What brings you here tonight, Olivia?" "I volunteer with the organization," she explained. "We're raising funds for a project to build schools in rural areas." Richard was intrigued. He spent the rest of the evening talking to her, genuinely interested in her passion for helping others. By the end of the night, he felt a connection he hadn't felt in years. Richard didn't waste any time. Over the next few weeks, he courted Olivia with a determination that surprised even himself. He took her out to elegant dinners, introduced her to his friends, and even attended some of her volunteering events, a stark departure from his usual routine. Thomas was the first to notice the change. "Boss, you're smiling a lot these days," he teased one morning as he drove Richard to work. "Am I?" Richard replied, glancing at Thomas through the rearview mirror. "Yes, and I think I know why." "It's Olivia, isn't it?" Richard didn't respond, but the faint smile on his face said it all. After several months of dating, Richard decided to take the plunge. He proposed to Olivia in a private moment at his penthouse, with the city lights twinkling behind them. He knelt down on one knee, the soft glow of the chandelier casting a warm light over them, and presented her with a diamond ring. "Olivia Bennet," he said, his voice steady. Will you marry me? Olivia was taken aback, tears welling up in her eyes. Richard, this is so unexpected. I know we haven't been together for long. Richard, I'd never met anyone like you. You've brought something into my life that I didn't even know I was missing. Will you do me the honor of being my wife? Olivia smiled, nodding through her tears. Yes, Richard, I'll marry you. The wedding was a grand affair, held in a stunning ballroom adorned with cascading floral arrangements and glittering chandeliers. The event was attended by the city's elite, as well as Olivia's close friends and family. The scent of fresh roses filled the air as a string quartet played soft melodies, creating an atmosphere of elegance and romance. Olivia's radiant smile lit up the room as she walked down the aisle, her white gown shimmering under the soft glow of the chandeliers. But as the days turned into weeks, Richard's old fears began to resurface. He couldn't shake the thought that Olivia might have married him for his wealth. Late one night, as Olivia slept beside him in their luxurious master bedroom with its silk-draped canopy bed, Richard stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. What if she's just putting on an act? What if she's only here because of the lifestyle I can provide? These doubts gnawed at him, growing stronger with each passing day. Richard decided he needed to find out the truth, no matter what it took. Richard's doubts about Olivia's love for him grew each day, casting a shadow over their once peaceful life. Her care, affection, and dedication toward him didn't seem enough to silence the voice in his head. Does she truly love me, or just my money? His late-night musings soon turned into a plan. One evening, after another long day at work, Richard called his three closest friends, Michael, Thomas, and Samuel, to meet him at their usual spot, a quiet booth in the luxurious hotel lounge where they often gathered. The lounge's ambient lighting and plush leather seats were familiar to them, a sanctuary from the chaos of their demanding lives. When they arrived, Richard appeared uncharacteristically tense. Thomas poured him a glass of whiskey, sliding it across the table. Boss, what's eating you today? You don't look yourself. Richard leaned back, swirling the whiskey in his glass. He hesitated before speaking. I need your help, he finally said, his tone serious. And I need you to promise me you won't ask too many questions or try to stop me. The group exchanged curious glances. Samuel, ever the skeptic, leaned forward. What's this about, Richard? You're making it sound like some top-secret mission. It's about Olivia, Richard said bluntly. Michael raised an eyebrow. What about Olivia? Is everything okay between you two? Richard sighed. I don't know, Michael. I've been having these doubts, these nagging thoughts. What if she doesn't actually love me for who I am? What if she's only here because of the lifestyle I give her? Samuel frowned. Richard, she seems genuine. Why are you doing this to yourself? That's the thing. I don't know. I can't just take her word for it. I need proof, Richard said, leaning forward, his voice almost a whisper. And that's why I've called you all here. I've come up with a way to test her. Thomas's face tightened. Test her? What exactly do you mean by that? Richard straightened up in his chair, laying out his idea. Medical records. Something convincing. You'll call Olivia and tell her that I've been in a terrible car accident and that my injuries are life altering. Tell her I'll never walk again, he explained. Michael's eyes widened. You can't be serious. Do you understand how cruel this is, Richard? Olivia has been nothing but kind to you. I need to know, Richard insisted. I need to know, Richard insisted. If she truly loves me, she won't care about my condition. She'll stay by my side no matter what. And what about me? Thomas asked, crossing his arms. You'll play along, Richard replied. You're going to be the one driving me home from the hospital and helping sell the story. She can't suspect anything. Samuel shook his head in disbelief. Richard, this is insane. You're risking your marriage just to satisfy your insecurities. Samuel, Richard said firmly, I need to do this. If Olivia's love is real, then this won't change anything. But if it isn't, I deserve to know the truth. After a long silence, Michael reluctantly agreed. Fine, I'll do it. But you owe her an explanation when this is over. The next morning, Michael made the call. Olivia picked up on the first ring, her cheerful voice turning to panic as Michael delivered the fabricated news. Mrs. Olivia, this is Dr. Michael. I'm afraid I have some terrible news. Richard was involved in a serious car accident. He's in critical condition at the hospital. You need to come right away. Olivia gasped, her heart racing. What? Oh my God! What happened? Is he going to be okay? Michael hesitated, playing his role. We're doing everything we can, but it doesn't look good. Olivia wasted no time. She rushed to the hospital, tears streaming down her face. The hospital's sterile hallways felt endless as she hurried to the room Michael had directed her to. As she arrived, she found Richard lying in a hospital bed, his face pale and his legs covered in heavy bandages. The soft hum of medical monitors filled the room, adding to the tension. Richard! She cried, rushing to his side. Richard looked up at her with faint weakness, his voice barely a whisper. Olivia, I'm sorry. Tears filled her eyes as she grasped his hand. Why are you apologizing? None of this is your fault. What matters is that you're alive. I'm here, Richard, and I'll take care of you. Michael entered the room, his expression solemn. Mrs. Olivia, I'm afraid I have to prepare you for the worst. Due to the severity of his injuries, Richard will never walk again. We've done all we can. Olivia's breath hitched, but she didn't hesitate. Then we'll adapt. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he's comfortable and happy. Michael's stomach churned with guilt as she turned to Richard, her expression filled with determination. You're my husband, Richard. I'll never abandon you. The next day, Michael discharged Richard, handing him off to Thomas. Olivia pushed Richard's wheelchair to the car and carefully helped him in. She smiled at him, despite her tear-streaked face. Don't worry, love, she said softly. We'll get through this together. Back at home, Olivia became a picture of devotion. She cooked Richard's favorite meals, washed his clothes, and rearranged their home to make it easier for him to move around in his wheelchair. Every time Richard watched her, he felt a pang of guilt. She was everything he could have asked for and more. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Olivia turned to him. Richard, she began, do you remember our wedding vows? I promised to love you in sickness and in health. That promise wasn't just for the good times. It's for times like this too. Richard's throat tightened. He nodded but said nothing, his guilt building as the days turned into weeks. 2 months later, Richard sat with his friends at their usual hotel. His voice was heavy as he spoke. "She's passed every test I've thrown at her," he admitted. "She takes care of me like nothing's changed. I think maybe I've been wrong about her all along." Samuel leaned back in his chair, a satisfied look on his face. "Told you, Richard, not every woman is out for your money." Thomas nodded in agreement. "She loves you, boss. That's clear as day." But Michael wasn't so quick to celebrate. "If you think this test was enough, Richard, you need to tell her the truth. She deserves to know." Richard sighed, knowing Michael was right. But just as he was starting to accept Olivia's love, Samuel had another suggestion. "A second test," Samuel said. "What if we take this a step further?" Samuel asked, a mischievous glint in his eye. Richard looked at him curiously. "What do you have in mind?" Samuel leaned forward, his voice low. "We'll see if she's truly faithful. Let's hire someone to test her loyalty. Someone she doesn't know. If she rejects him, then you'll know for sure." Though part of Richard felt it was unnecessary, the insecurities buried deep in his heart whispered otherwise. "All right," he said finally. And so, the wheels for the next test were set in motion. Richard had begun to feel a sense of comfort with Olivia's devotion after the accident. Yet Samuel's suggestion to put Olivia through another test reignited the embers of doubt in his heart. If Olivia's love was genuine, he reasoned, this test would prove her loyalty beyond any doubt. The plan was simple yet calculated. Samuel proposed hiring a man known for his irresistible charm, a professional womanizer named Martin. Martin had a reputation for making women fall for him in mere days, no matter how loyal or committed they were. If Olivia stayed faithful, Richard promised himself he would trust her completely and put his insecurities to rest. "Are you sure this is necessary, Samuel?" Richard asked one evening as they sat in their usual corner of the lounge. Samuel leaned back, crossing his arms. "Absolutely. Look, you said you wanted to know for sure, didn't you? Martin's the guy for the job. If Olivia doesn't fall for his tricks, then there's nothing left for you to doubt." Thomas frowned, hesitant. "This feels wrong. Olivia has proven herself. Why do you have to keep testing her, Richard?" Richard didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his glass of whiskey, then muttered, "Because I have to know if she's the one. I need to be sure." Samuel pulled out his phone. "I'll set it up. Martin will accidentally bump into her at one of the places she volunteers. From there, we'll see how she reacts." It was a breezy afternoon when Olivia first encountered Martin. She was sorting through boxes of donated clothes at the community center when a tall, striking man with an easy smile strolled up to her. "Excuse me, miss," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "Do you work here?" Olivia looked up, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "I volunteer here. Yes. How can I help you?" Martin flashed a disarming grin. "I'm donating some items, but honestly, I'm impressed by what you're doing here. It's not every day you see someone giving so much of their time and energy for others." Olivia smiled politely. It's no big deal, really. Just trying to help where I can." For the next few minutes, Martin lingered, asking her questions about her work and casually weaving in personal comments. "You must have a good heart," he remarked. leaning slightly closer. Not many people would dedicate themselves like this. Olivia thanked him, but kept the conversation professional. Over the next few days, Martin showed up at the community center more often. At first, it was under the guise of donating or asking about volunteer opportunities, but as time went on, his intentions became clearer. One afternoon, he found Olivia on her lunch break, sitting on a bench outside. He approached her with 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you could use a break," he said, handing her one of the cups. Olivia hesitated before accepting it. "That's very kind of you. Thank you." As they talked, he began subtly steering the conversation toward more personal topics. "So, Olivia, do you do this full time, or do you have a family to take care of?" Olivia smiled and held up her hand, showing her wedding ring. "I'm married, actually. My husband's name is Richard." Martin's smile didn't falter. "Lucky guy," he said smoothly. "Still, I bet you don't get much time for yourself. You're always taking care of others, aren't you?" Olivia laughed lightly. "I'm happy with my life. My husband supports me in everything I do, and that's all I need." Undeterred, Martin continued to lay his charm on thick over the coming week. From compliments to offering to help her with her work, he did everything he could to win her over. But Olivia never wavered. Each time he pushed the boundaries, she shut him down gently but firmly. "Martin," she said one evening after he had made another subtle attempt to ask her out, "I appreciate your kindness, but I'm happily married. Please respect that." By the end of the week, Martin knew his task was a failure, not because he lacked skill, but because Olivia was unwavering in her love for Richard. He met with Richard at their usual lounge, delivering his report. "You've got a good one, Richard," Martin said, shaking his head. She wouldn't budge. I tried everything: compliments, sympathy, even playing the "I need emotional support" card, but she wouldn't give me the time of day. Richard sat in stunned silence. His heart felt both heavy with guilt and light with relief. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Positive. That woman loves you. If she didn't, trust me, I'd have known by now," Martin said confidently. Samuel clapped Richard on the back, grinning. "See, I told you she's the real deal. You don't need to doubt her anymore." Thomas, who had been silent for most of the meeting, finally spoke. "Now, the only question is, how are you going to make it up to her, Richard?" The next morning, Richard woke before Olivia. He went to the kitchen and made a tray of her favorite breakfast: fresh tea, buttery croissants, and fruit. It wasn't something he'd ever done before, but he knew he needed to show her how much she meant to him. Carrying the tray to the bedroom, he gently set it down on the nightstand and touched Olivia's shoulder. "Good morning, love," he said softly. Olivia stirred, opening her eyes slowly. "Richard, what's all this?" Richard sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. Olivia frowned in confusion. "For what?" Richard took a deep breath. "Olivia, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." He explained everything: his doubts, the fake accident, and even the man he had hired to test her. As he spoke, Olivia listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When he finished, Richard looked at her nervously. "I was wrong to doubt you," he said earnestly. "You've been nothing but loyal and loving, and I didn't trust that. I'm so sorry. Can you forgive me?" Olivia was silent for a moment, then let out a small laugh. You really went through all that trouble just to see if I love you. Richard looked away, ashamed. Yes. Olivia reached out and cupped his face, turning his head